My name is Emily Carter. I am 31 years old, and I live in Portland, Oregon. And if you asked me what moment made a daughter finally understand that family could also become the loneliest place in the world, I would tell you about that Easter dinner. Not because the food had gone cold, not because of the curious eyes around the table, but because my mother, Margaret Carter, stood up in the living room of my sister's house, raised her glass of wine as if she were about to say something gentle, then turned and looked straight at me in front of 25 relatives. "Emily," she said, her voice so soft that strangers might have mistaken it for pity. "I just hope that one day you'll be able to provide a home for yourself the way Claire has." The room fell silent for a few seconds. Then a few small laughs followed, brief and awkward, but sharp enough for me to feel every cut. My father looked down and adjusted the napkin on his lap. He did not look at me. He was always like that, always choosing silence at the exact moment when I needed someone to stand by me most. Claire, my older sister, sat at the end of the sofa, leaning toward me with that familiar, pitying smile. "Don't be upset," she said quietly, but deliberately loud enough for a few people to hear. "Not everyone has a clear plan in life." I looked at her. I looked at her spacious house. I looked at my mother standing in the middle of the room like the host of a play in which I had always been cast as the failure. And for the first time, I did not feel hurt the way I used to. I only felt strange. Strange that they still believed I was the woman struggling in a tiny apartment, living on luck, working some computer thing job. My mother had never cared enough to understand. If you have ever been underestimated by your own family the way Emily was, comment 1. And if this story touches you, subscribe to the channel and continue this journey with me. What no one in that room knew was that I had moved 3 months earlier. Not into a cheaper apartment as my mother kept telling relatives. Not because I had run out of money. I had moved into a house on the slope of the West Hills with floor-to-ceiling glass windows, oak floors, a balcony overlooking a valley covered in Douglas firs, and a deed with my name on it. I could have said it right then. I could have set down my glass of water, looked at my mother, and said, "You're wrong." But I did not, because some truths, when spoken while other people are performing, only become an argument. I had lived with my mother long enough to understand that she never lost a confrontation. She simply changed roles from the person who caused the wound to the person who had been wounded. So I stayed silent. I let my mother keep talking. I let Claire keep smiling. I let the entire room believe they had witnessed one more pitiful moment in my life. But before I left, I stopped at the living room doorway and looked at Claire. "Are you free this Saturday?" I asked. "I'd like to invite you over for tea. I have a new place." Claire's smile froze. My mother turned her head very quickly. "A new place?" she asked. I only smiled. "Yes. It's nothing big. I just think you should see it." When I stepped out of that house, the cold wind brushed against my face. Behind me, my mother had already begun explaining to everyone that I had probably just rented another apartment. But this time I did not feel angry. I only felt calm. Because the door I was about to open for Claire that Saturday would not lead only into my house. It would lead my entire family back to a secret my mother had buried for 13 years. 3 years before that Easter dinner, my life looked nothing like the image of a winner. I lived in a studio apartment in southeast Portland, less than 500 square feet, with a window that always trembled whenever trucks passed by, and a kitchen faucet that dripped steadily, as if reminding me that time itself could exhaust a person. I did not hate that place. At least I had a door. I could lock a desk with enough room for my laptop and a tiny kitchen corner where I could cook rice with frozen vegetables. But every time I came home after a long day at work and saw the old yellow light spilling across the stained wall, I would hear my mother's voice in my head. "Emily is still renting that tiny room. She works in some technology field. I'm not really sure. Everything is so unstable these days." She always said it as if she felt sorry for me. But the older I became, the more I understood that some forms of pity were just another way for people to stand above you. My mother did not need to call me a failure. She only needed to tell my story in a voice sad enough, and everyone else would understand that I was the most worrying daughter in the family. I was 28, then working as a cybersecurity analyst for a mid-sized company downtown. It was my first official title after years of contract work night shifts and fixing broken systems. The salary was not low, but my student loans felt like a stone tied around my ankle. I drove an old Civic with a cracked dashboard that looked like a scar. On my phone, I kept a detailed spreadsheet for rent, electricity, gas, and food. Some weeks I would stand in front of the produce section for a long time just deciding whether I should buy a bag of apples. Then I would put it back. What hurt me was not being poor. I had never been ashamed of starting low. What hurt was that my family used that stage of my life to define me. To them, I was not Emily trying to stand back up. I was Emily who rented. Emily who was single. Emily who had nothing worth showing off. Meanwhile, Claire, my older sister, already had a 4-bedroom house in Lake Oswego, a husband who worked in finance, and a bright, polished kitchen she posted on Facebook. My mother said Claire had saved for it herself, planned for it herself, and known how to seize opportunities. I used to believe that. I also used to blame myself for not being as capable as my sister. There were nights when I sat on the cold kitchen floor, eating plain rice with fried eggs, wondering if maybe I truly was not good enough. But back then I did not yet know that the distance between Claire and me had not begun with ability. It had begun with a lie my mother told at the kitchen table when I was 18. The summer I turned 18, 2 weeks before I was supposed to start at Oregon State, my mother called me down to the kitchen. Back then I still believed the kitchen was the safest place in the house, a place that smelled of toast where my father opened the newspaper and my mother stood beside the coffee maker. She placed a white envelope in front of me. There was no school logo. No congratulatory letter. Just a few neatly folded bank documents. Emily, my mother said, lowering her voice, as if every word hurt her, I have to tell you something. Your college fund is gone. I stared at her for a long time. Not because I understood right away, but because my brain seemed to stop receiving signals. That fund was something my grandmother had mentioned every time she visited. She would say, "Just study, Emily. One day, this little bit of money will open a door for you." What do you mean it's gone? I asked. My mother took my hand. Her hand was warm, soft, and so familiar that I did not doubt her at all. The market fell too hard. The investment account lost almost everything. Your father and I tried to save it, but we couldn't in time. I'm sorry. I started crying right there at the kitchen table. Not loudly, but in the kind of way where tears fall uncontrollably, and your throat closes up. My mother pulled me into her arms, and stroked my hair the way she had when I was little. You're strong, she whispered. You'll find a way. The next morning, it was my mother who sat beside me while I filled out student loan applications. She explained every blank space, every interest amount, every signature. When my hand trembled, she put her hand on my shoulder and said, "This is only the first step. Every adult has to sacrifice." I believed her. I believed her so completely that for years afterward, every time I saw a student loan payment leave my account, I did not blame my mother. I blamed the market. I blamed bad luck. I blamed myself for not winning a bigger scholarship. Then Claire bought her first house in Lake Oswego when she was only 27. My mother hosted a small dinner to celebrate her, but the way she walked through that house made it feel more like an award ceremony than a family meal. She praised the stone countertops, the curtains, the living room. Claire has always known how to prepare for the future, my mother told Aunt Patrice. She started saving very early. I sat beside my father, forcing myself to smile. He only nodded, silent as usual. Claire looked at me with an expression that was half pride, half pity. You'll get there too, she said. If you learn how to plan. I smiled. I even congratulated her. I genuinely thought she deserved it. But there was one thing I did not know. While I was signing loan papers for my own future, part of that future had been transferred directly into my sister's dream of owning a home. And my mother, the woman who had wiped away my tears at the kitchen table, was also the one who had created the reason for me to cry. Thanksgiving that year was held at Claire's house. From the front yard, I could already see warm yellow light spilling through the large windows, and I saw my mother standing in the middle of the spacious kitchen, as if she were the owner. She pointed at the new light fixture, then turned to Aunt Patrice with a proud look in her eyes. I walked in with a bottle of wine I had bought at the grocery store. Claire took it, thanked me quickly, then placed it in the far corner of the kitchen counter, behind the more expensive bottles. It was a small gesture, but I still noticed. In my family, contempt rarely arrived as shouting. It came as a passing glance, a thank you that did not last long enough. There were 14 people at the table that day. I sat near the end. Claire sat at the head of the table, Todd beside her, while my mother moved back and forth to straighten napkins, pour water, and ask if anyone wanted more mashed potatoes. She had not cooked that dinner, but the way she moved made everyone feel as if this house were her achievement. Claire chose this paint color herself. My mother told Aunt Patrice. She has such good taste, doesn't she? Then my mother looked at me. Emily, are you still in that old studio? I looked up. Yes. She sighed loudly enough for that whole side of the table to hear. I worry about you so much. Your tech job sounds unstable. And renting forever just means watching your money disappear. Aunt Patrice looked at me with pity. Claire set down her glass. You know, she said, if you had listened to me back then, maybe you would already be in the housing market by now. I'm doing fine, I replied. Claire smiled. No one said you weren't. I'm just trying to help. My father sat across the table. He heard everything. I knew he did, because his hand tightened around the handle of his knife, but he still lowered his head, still cut his turkey into tiny, meaningless pieces. His silence had never protected me. It had only left me to break alone. After dinner, I stood to help wash the dishes. Claire stopped me in a voice, sweet as honey. No need, Emily. You're a guest. I looked around her shining kitchen. A kitchen praised as proof of adulthood. And I was only someone passing through, belonging nowhere, having nothing to contribute. That night before driving home, I sat in my old Civic under the rain-soaked trees and opened my phone. Claire had just created a new group chat to plan Christmas. My mother, my father, my aunts, uncles, cousins, and everyone else had been added. Everyone except me. I texted her, "Did you forget to add me to the group?" Claire replied almost immediately. Oh my gosh, I totally forgot. I'll add you right now. But she did not add me. I sat there a little longer watching the screen fade dark in my hand. Beyond the car window, the lights from Claire's house glowed bright and warm. Inside was my family. And I was sitting outside on the street, slowly understanding something. Sometimes people do not have to throw you out of a family. They only have to forget you enough times until your absence becomes normal. The call came on a Tuesday night in November. I was sitting on the floor of my studio apartment, my back against the leg of the old sofa, my laptop open in front of me with a security alert I needed to review before a presentation the next morning. Outside the window, Portland rain fell in a thin sheet, blurring the glass like breath. My phone vibrated. Uncle Frank's name appeared on the screen. He rarely called. We usually only texted on birthdays or a few holidays. So the moment I saw his name, I knew something was wrong. Emily, he said, his voice, rough and low, I've been wrestling with this for a long time. But I can't keep it to myself anymore. I set my laptop aside. "What is it, Uncle Frank?" There was silence on the other end. I could hear him breathing like a man standing before a door he was afraid to open. "Your college fund was not lost because of the market," he said. "Your mother withdrew it. All of it." I did not answer. Not because I had not heard him clearly, but because every word landed too slowly, too heavily. "How much?" I asked. $42,380. In March, the year you turned 18. I was at the bank that day. I saw Gloria sign the withdrawal papers. The tiny room suddenly became frighteningly quiet. The kitchen faucet was still dripping, each drop falling into the cold stainless steel sink. I stared at it as if staring long enough could turn everything he had just said into a misunderstanding. "Where did the money go?" I asked. Uncle Frank swallowed hard. "Into your parents' joint account." 2 weeks later, Claire made the down payment on her first house. I slid off the sofa and fully onto the floor. The cold tile pressed against my legs. The phone hurt against my ear, but I did not let go. I did not cry. Something inside my chest simply went still, like the last light at the end of a hallway being switched off. I kept the documents, Uncle Frank continued. "Bank statements, signatures, transfer dates. Whenever you're ready, I'll send them." I said yes, but my voice did not sound like my own. That night I did not sleep. I lay there staring at the stain on the ceiling, calculating the money that had been taken, my student loans, the years I had blamed myself, and all the times my mother had held me and told me I was strong. It turned out she had not comforted me after an accident. She had comforted me after something she had done. If you understand what it feels like to have an opportunity stolen from you and still have to stay silent just to keep going, comment, "I understand." And don't forget to subscribe to the channel because the next part is where the truth finally begins to return to its rightful place. Around 2 in the morning, I sat up, opened my laptop, and created a new spreadsheet. Income, savings, investments, goals. I did not call my mother. I did not text Claire. I did not rush to anyone's house demanding justice. I understood my mother too well. If I confronted her, she would cry. She would say Uncle Frank was bitter, and she would turn me into the ungrateful daughter who had torn the family apart. So I chose another way. I would not give her a stage to perform on. I would build my own. The Sunday after Uncle Frank's call, my mother called me. Her voice was as gentle as always, so gentle that if I had not known the truth, I might have believed there was nothing behind it but love. "Emily, I just ran into Aunt Patrice at the store. She knows someone with a few cheaper apartments in Milwaukee. Do you want me to ask for the number?" I stood in the middle of my tiny kitchen looking at the old faucet, still dripping one drop at a time. "I'm not looking for another place, Mom." "Oh, I just thought your rent had gone up. You live alone and I worry about you." "I never told you my rent went up." There was a slight pause on the other end. Then my mother laughed. I must have heard it from someone. Anyway, it's always good to have a backup plan. After we hung up, I opened Facebook. Aunt Patrice's message appeared first. "Your mother said you're looking for something cheaper. I know a good landlord." Then came Uncle Dennis. "There's no shame in moving somewhere smaller if you need to, sweetheart." Then my cousin Laura. "I heard you're having a hard time." I read every message. 7 relatives, 7 different voices, all repeating the same story I had never told. My mother had released a version of my life like a family newsletter. In it, I was not a woman working, paying her debts, and pulling herself back to her feet. I was the poor youngest daughter who needed saving. Then I saw Claire's new post. A photo of her newly renovated kitchen, white stone countertops, brass handles, perfect lighting. The caption read, "Grateful for Mom, who has always believed in me." It was posted on my birthday. I set the phone down slowly. Some blows do not need to make a sound. They only need to arrive on the right day. That night, I opened my spreadsheet again. I cut out takeout. I canceled streaming subscriptions. I reduced shopping to almost nothing. Every month, I pushed another amount into my investment account. It was not much, but it was steady. I treated every dollar saved like a brick. At work, I went to Diane Prescott, the Vice President of Security Intelligence. She was in her 50s, with chin-length silver hair glasses, on a thin chain, and a stare that made people afraid to lie. I did not tell her about my family. I only asked, "How do I move further here?" Diane looked at me over her glasses. "You already have Emily. The problem is that you keep letting yourself stay invisible." She pushed a folder toward me. It was a security audit project for the largest hospital network the company had ever landed. The previous lead had just resigned. The deadline was tight. The risk was high. "If you take this and pull it off," Diane said, "the people upstairs will know your name." I held the folder. It felt heavier than ordinary paperwork. Or maybe I understood that from that moment on, I was not just accepting a project. I was taking back the right to write my own name into my own life. The hospital project lasted almost a year. There were nights when I left the office with only a few cars remaining in the parking lot under the cold white lights. There were mornings when I drank coffee instead of eating breakfast, then sat in front of the screen until my eyes burned. I did not tell my mother. I did not tell Claire. I did not tell anyone in the family. Not because I had wanted to keep it a secret from the beginning, but because I had grown too used to watching my mother make every achievement of mine smaller. Once, after I had resolved a major issue for a client, I tried calling her. I told her the company was very pleased and that I might be given a team of my own. My mother only said, "That's good. Oh, Claire just ordered a new patio set. It's beautiful." From that day on, I stopped bringing my joy back to a place where it was always placed beneath someone else's feet. I worked 12 hours a day, sometimes more. I earned additional certifications, took on difficult assignments, and stepped forward to present in meetings where I used to sit at the back of the room. Diane did not give praise easily, but every time she nodded, I knew I was moving in the right direction. A year later, I was promoted to team lead. My salary rose significantly. I did not post about it online. I did not call anyone to brag. I only opened my spreadsheet at midnight, updated the new number, and watched the goal cell light up like a small window in the dark. That Christmas, the family gathered again at Claire's house. The living room had just been renovated with a large television, mounted in the center like a medal. My mother walked guests through every corner, constantly talking about Claire's wonderful taste. Then she turned to me and asked in a pitying voice, "Are you still in that tiny apartment?" Claire stood beside her and smiled faintly. "If you had listened to me sooner about real estate, things might be different for you now." I held my glass of water and looked at the two women in front of me. One had taken away my starting point. The other had lived inside that advantage and still believed she had simply moved faster than I had. I did not answer. Some rooms do not need your explanation. They only need you to leave and build another room of your own. Early the next year, my mother began trying to set me up with men. She sent me the phone number of a man named Greg who worked in commercial insurance and owned a house in Beaverton. "He owns a home," my mother texted. "You're 31, Emily. You can't keep living like a student forever." In my mother's world, a man with a house was more trustworthy than a daughter with ability. A marriage certificate mattered more than my job title. That night, after completing a system migration without any interruption, I made tea, sat on the floor of my small apartment, and opened a home search website. Not to find Greg. Not to chase my mother's standards. I was looking for a place where when I stepped inside, I would not have to prove I deserved to be there. 6 months later, I drove through the West Hills on a Saturday morning. Mist still clung to the Douglas firs, and below them a green-gray valley opened under the pale sunlight. The house sat at the end of a stone driveway with tall glass windows, a wide balcony, a stone fireplace, and a kitchen large enough that no one would ever have to sit in the spare chair. I stood in the empty living room and listened to the wind moving through the trees. No one called me pitiful. No one mentioned Claire. No one called my work some computer thing. There was only me, the light, and the feeling of being home before the key even belonged to me. 3 weeks after that first showing, I sat in a notary's office with a black pen in my hand. In front of me was a stack of paperwork so thick that it looked exhausting at first glance. The real estate agent pointed to each place where I needed to sign. I wrote my name again and again, Emily Carter, Emily Carter, Emily Carter, until those letters no longer felt like a formality. They felt like a declaration. When they placed the key in my palm, that small piece of metal warmed from my skin. I stared at it for a long time. No one in that room knew how heavy a key could be. It did not only open the door to a house, it opened the part of my life my mother was no longer allowed to define for me. I drove straight to the West Hills. The house stood quietly in the late afternoon light, its glass windows reflecting the soft orange of sunset. I unlocked the door, stepped into the empty living room, and heard my shoes echo across the oak floor. There was no furniture, no voices. Only a space so wide that it almost frightened me. I stood in the middle of the room and looked down at the valley covered in Douglas firs. I thought I would cry. But I did not. I only breathed out long and slow, as if I had been holding my breath for years without realizing it. I did not call my mother. I did not text Claire. I did not post a single photo. Some victories, if revealed too soon, will be picked up by other people and turned into their story. I wanted to keep this moment whole for a little longer. I moved in on a Saturday morning. No large moving truck. No housewarming party. My old Civic carried one small box at a time. Clothes, books, my laptop, a few ceramic plates, and the cast iron pan that had followed me through several rented apartments. The house was so spacious that my footsteps sounded almost lost. I bought furniture slowly. A deep gray sofa, a wooden bed, an old maple dining table with a few scratches on its surface. I liked those scratches. It was not perfect, but it was sturdy. That was how I wanted to see myself. The first person I invited over was Diane. She stood in the doorway, looked up at the high ceiling, then walked toward the wide glass wall. For a long moment she said nothing. Emily, she finally said, "This place is beautiful. Does your family know?" I poured wine into 2 glasses. No. Diane turned back to look at me. "You're not hiding it to punish them," she said. "You're keeping one place for yourself that they haven't touched yet." Maybe she was right. Or maybe I simply did not want to give my mother one more thing she could tell wrong. That night, after Diane left, I opened the drawer of my desk. Inside were the deed to the house and the envelope Uncle Frank had sent. I placed them side by side, one thing proving what I had lost, the other proving what I had built back on my own. Then I closed the drawer. Not yet. That March, Claire's daughter turned 4. The party was held in my sister's backyard beneath a white canopy. I brought a stuffed elephant. Lily hugged my leg, then ran off to show everyone her gift. My heart softened. Children do not carry the sins of adults, and I did not want to turn that little girl into part of this war. But my mother always knew how to pull me back into the exact place she had prepared for me. When a few women from her book club came over, she placed her hand on my shoulder and introduced me in that sweet voice of hers. "This is Emily, my youngest daughter. She's still finding her way." I looked at her. I'm the director of the cybersecurity division, Mom. My mother let out a small laugh as if I had said something childish. Technology titles sound so complicated these days. Claire walked past and said, "At least Emily is always optimistic." I did not answer. I looked across the yard and saw Uncle Frank sitting alone near the fence, holding a glass of lemonade, his posture slightly bent but his eyes very clear. He had only recently been invited back to family gatherings after years of being frozen out by my mother, all because he had once known too much. I walked over and sat beside him. "Have you opened the envelope?" he asked quietly. "Yes. Her signature is there." "I know." Across the yard, my mother turned to look at us. Her smile was still on her lips, but the corners of her eyes had tightened. She called out, "Frank, don't start bringing up old stories and putting strange thoughts in her head." He did not respond. That silence told me everything. My mother was not afraid he would lie. She was afraid he would tell the truth. That evening, I returned to West Hills, made tea, and opened the envelope again. The bank statements lay on the table, flat and cold. The account was in my name. My mother was listed as the guardian. The money had been drained in March, the year I turned 18. Her signature sat at the bottom of the page, soft and even, just like the handwriting on birthday cards. I placed the bank statement beside the deed to my house. One was proof of what my mother had taken. The other was proof of what I had won back on my own. Easter was 8 weeks away. Claire would be hosting dinner for the entire extended family. I knew my mother would once again perform the role of the worried, loving mother. I knew Claire would smile again from inside the kitchen. Everyone praised. And this time I would not arrive empty-handed. How do you think Claire will react when she walks through Emily's gate? Comment 1 if you think she will be shocked, and comment 2 if you think she will be jealous. And subscribe to the channel if you want to hear the full twist. I called Uncle Frank before going to bed. "Can you come if I need you?" I asked. "All you have to do is say one word," he replied. I looked out at the dark valley below the hill. The distant lights looked like secrets waiting to be switched on. "Then be ready," I said. "Because this time, I'm not going to let my mother tell my story for me anymore." That Easter arrived with a cold morning, the Oregon sky bright, but still damp. I sat in my car outside Claire's house for almost half a minute, looking at the cars parked tightly along both sides of the street. Through the window, I could see my mother moving among the relatives, a glass in her hand, smiling with the confidence of someone preparing to step onto a stage. I inhaled slowly. There were no bank statements in my purse. I had not brought proof to throw in anyone's face in the middle of dinner. I had only brought my calm, something I had paid for with years of silence. Claire's house was decorated so carefully that there was almost no room left for anything natural. Tulips on the table, cream-colored napkins, porcelain rabbits beside the dessert tray. My mother greeted me at the door with a quick look from my hair down to my shoes. "Emily, you're too thin," she said. "Are you eating properly?" "I'm fine, Mom." "Happy Easter." She turned to Aunt Patrice. "She always says she's fine. I just worry about her." I smiled. That smile was not agreement. It was simply my way of not giving her another reaction she could use against me. All through dinner, my mother missed no chance to praise Claire. She talked about the living room paint, the stone countertops, the polished wood floors, and how Claire had known how to choose the right neighborhood. Every compliment for Claire cast a shadow over me. Claire has always had a plan, my mother said, as everyone was eating dessert. Even as a little girl, she knew what she wanted. Claire lowered her head and smiled. My father sat near the end of the table, occasionally glancing at me before looking back down at his plate. Maybe he sensed that something was about to happen. Or maybe he was only doing what he did best, turning himself into a harmless witness. After dinner, everyone moved into the living room. The children sat on the floor while the adults held cups of coffee. Then my mother stood. She raised her wineglass and tapped it lightly. "May I say a few words?" she said. The room softened into silence. My mother looked at Claire, first her eyes shining with rehearsed pride. "Claire, thank you for opening this beautiful home to the whole family. What you have built makes me so proud. This is the result of hard work, discipline, and making the right choices." A few people clapped. Claire blushed with pleasure. Then my mother turned to me. "And Emily," she said, her voice becoming gentle, "I know you are still trying. Not everyone moves at the same pace. One day I believe you'll be able to provide a home for yourself too." The air sank. A small laugh slipped out from one corner of the room, then died almost immediately. Aunt Patrice looked at me with pity. Claire leaned toward me. "There's nothing shameful about renting," she said. "Everyone has to start somewhere." I looked at her, then at my mother. Everyone was waiting for me to blush, argue, or lower my head. But I only set my glass of water on the table. "I know," I said to Claire. "Everyone starts somewhere." Claire smiled, believing she had won. No one knew that in just a few minutes I would invite Claire to the place where all their pity would have nowhere left to stand. 10 minutes after my mother's toast, I stood in the hallway near the coat closet. I had just picked up my keys when Claire stepped toward me, lightly blocking my way. Her eyes said more than her words could. It was the look of someone who had just won a small round and wanted to watch her opponent admit defeat. "Honestly, Emily," she said, her voice low enough to sound private, but loud enough for Aunt Patrice and a few relatives to hear, "are you jealous?" I looked at her. "Jealous of what?" Claire smiled and let her eyes sweep across the living room. "The house. This life. Stability. I know you always try to act like you don't care, but sometimes admitting it makes things easier." I was silent for a few seconds. In my mind, I saw the kitchen in West Hills, two ceramic mugs beside the teapot glass doors, looking down into the valley, and the deed resting inside my drawer. "I'm sure you worked very hard for it," I said. Claire's smile froze. "What is that supposed to mean?" "Exactly what I said." She stared at me longer. For the first time that evening, the pity on her face cracked, revealing confusion underneath. She was used to watching me lower my head beneath her little insults. Once I stopped lowering it, she did not know where to place her hands. From the living room, my mother spoke. "Claire, don't let your sister ruin your mood. Emily has always been far too sensitive." I heard that sentence, and something inside me felt like a door being locked. I put on my coat, took my keys, then stopped at the entrance to the living room. "Claire," I said. Everyone turned toward me. "Are you free this Saturday? I'd like to invite you over for tea." "I have a new place." The air in the room changed instantly. Eyes slid from me to my mother, then from my mother to Claire. My mother set the dessert plate down harder than necessary. "A new place?" she asked. "When did you move?" "A while ago," I replied. "It's nothing big." Claire narrowed her eyes. "You moved and didn't tell anyone. You can come see it on Saturday. 2 in the afternoon. I'll text you the address." My mother looked at me as if she were searching for a crack in my face she could slip into. "Emily, if you've rented somewhere too expensive again, I need to know." I smiled. "You don't need to worry." That sentence bothered her more than any argument could have. I said goodbye to everyone, thanked Claire for dinner, and stepped outside. Behind me, my mother's voice sharpened. "It's probably just another apartment. She always makes everything so secretive." I closed the door before I could hear the rest. Outside, cold wind moved through the trees. I walked down the stone path, my palm wrapped tightly around my car key. But I was not thinking about my old Civic. I was thinking about the gate to my own house, and Claire's face when it opened. Saturday came very slowly. That morning I woke up early, even though the house was already clean. I still wiped the kitchen counter, placed 2 ceramic mugs beside the teapot, and baked lemon blueberry scones. The smell of warm butter drifted through the spacious kitchen so gentle that it almost made me forget a 13-year crack was about to open. I wore a cream sweater jeans and tied my hair low. This was not a performance. The house was already enough to speak for me. A little after 2, the sound of gravel under tires came from the driveway. Claire's SUV stopped in front of the house, but she did not get out right away. Through the glass, I saw her sitting motionless, her hands on the steering wheel, her eyes fixed on the front of the house, as if she were trying to deny the address on her phone. I opened the door. "Come in," I said. "The tea is ready." Claire walked up the stone path. Her heels tapped softly, each step slower than the last. When she crossed the threshold, she stopped. Her eyes moved from the high ceiling to the iron staircase, from the stone fireplace to the glass wall, overlooking the valley. For the first time, I saw her unable to find a sentence that could place her above me. "Emily," she whispered. "Whose house is this?" "Mine." "Are you renting it?" "I bought it." She turned sharply toward me. "That's impossible." I simply looked at her the way one looks at someone who has just collided with the truth after years of living in a dark room. Claire walked into the kitchen, placed her hand on the stone countertop, opened one cabinet, then closed it again. She stepped toward the large glass wall, looked down at the valley, and took out her phone. Her hand was shaking so badly that she pressed the wrong button. "Mom," she said, when the call connected, her voice breaking. "You need to come here right now. You need to see this." I heard my mother's voice through the speaker, panicked, asking if something had happened to her. Claire only said, "I'm sending the address." "Come now." My mother arrived in less than 20 minutes. So quickly that I knew she must have driven as if someone had just set fire to the perfect image she had built. My father walked in behind her. My mother entered first. She was wearing a pale purple sweater and her familiar pearl earrings. The moment she crossed the doorway, she stopped. Several seconds passed. No one said anything. "What is this?" my mother asked. "My house," I replied. "Welcome, Mom." She moved into the living room, touched the back of the sofa, looked at the fireplace, the bookshelves, and the valley. Every object in that house seemed to argue against every story she had ever told about me. "How did you buy this?" she asked, her voice growing thin. "I've been a senior director for over a year. My salary bonuses and investments were enough to buy it." "Senior director," she repeated. "Since when?" "Since you stopped truly asking about my work." My father stood at the entrance to the living room, his eyes turning red. He looked around the house, then looked at me. His lips trembled slightly. "Emily," he said hoarsely, "I'm proud of you." That sentence hurt more than any insult, because I had waited for it far too long. My father stepped forward and hugged me. His embrace was awkward but tight. My mother stood a few steps away outside, that embrace, her face pale. Claire sat on the edge of the sofa, staring at the floor, like someone who had just realized her house was no longer the only proof of success in the family. But the real twist had not even begun. "How did you buy this house?" Claire asked. "You still had a huge student loan." "Yes," I said. "Because I had to borrow." My mother turned sharply toward me. "Emily, don't start." That sentence was far too familiar. Don't start. Don't make it a bigger deal. Don't ruin the mood. My entire youth had been locked inside sentences like that. But this time I was no longer the 18-year-old girl crying at the kitchen table. "I haven't started, Mom," I replied. "You're the one who started it 13 years ago." Claire stood up. What is going on? I looked at her. My college fund was not lost because of the market. It was drained in March the year I turned 18. 2 weeks later, you made the down payment on your first house. Claire's face went pale. No. Mom said both funds were gone. Your fund was not gone, I said. Mine was transferred into the joint account. My mother let out a laugh, but it was dry and sharp. This is ridiculous. Frank has been filling your head with poisonous nonsense, hasn't he? At that exact moment, the doorbell rang. No one moved. I went to open the door. Uncle Frank stood on the porch wearing an old flannel shirt, his hair messy from the wind, a white envelope in his hand. He walked inside and placed the envelope on the kitchen table between the teapot and the plate of scones. My mother looked at it as if she were looking at a knife. I opened it, took out the bank statement and laid it flat on the table. Custodial account, I said. Beneficiary, Emily Carter. Custodian, Margaret Carter. Balance before withdrawal, $42,380. Withdrawal date, March 14th, the year I turned 18. Mom's signature at the bottom of the page. Claire held the paper with both hands. Her lips moved as she read each line. Mom, she said very softly, you told me that was money you and Dad had saved. My father sat down in the chair near the wall. He covered his face with both hands. Margaret, he whispered, you told me the account had lost value. You even showed me the papers. A fake summary, Uncle Frank said. The real one is here. My mother looked at every person in the room, trying to find a gap she could escape through. But for the first time, no one gave her one. I did it for the family, my mother said. No, I replied. You did it for Claire. And you let me pay the price while telling everyone I was incompetent. Claire placed the bank statement down. Tears ran through her mascara. Emily, I didn't know. I swear. You didn't ask, I said. Not knowing and not wanting to know are two different things. Then I looked at my mother. I'm not asking for the money back. I don't need it anymore. I built this house without it. But from today on, you do not get to tell relatives that I am poor, that I am failing, or that I need to be saved. My mother opened her mouth. I raised my hand to stop her. If you want to step into my home, you step in as a guest, not as the narrator of my life. If you have ever had to set boundaries with family, even when it hurt, comment boundaries. And if this story makes you feel less alone, subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. For the first time in my life, my mother stood in a room full of people and had no words left to rewrite the truth. The news spread through the family faster than I expected. Not through one big meeting, and not through some heavy announcement. It spread through short phone calls, messages asking whether it was true or not, and the silences that came when people realized they had believed the wrong thing for far too long. On Sunday night, Aunt Patrice called me. Her voice was softer than usual. Emily, I'm sorry, she said. I thought you were truly struggling. I just believed your mother. I stood on the balcony, looking at the valley, sinking into gray mist. I know, Aunt Patrice, but I should have asked you first. That sentence made me go quiet. Not because it fixed anything, but because someone had finally named part of my wound correctly. They had not only believed my mother, they had never asked me. After Aunt Patrice, Uncle Dennis texted, then Laura, then a few relatives who had once sent me cheap advice about rent. They all apologized in different ways. Some were sincere. Some were only panicking because they had stood on the wrong side. I was not in a hurry to forgive. My mother reacted exactly as I expected. She called everyone, saying Uncle Frank was trying to destroy the family, saying I had been manipulated, saying money matters from years ago were more complicated than people understood. But this time her words collided with something harder than tears. A bank statement with her signature. A few days later, Claire called. I was sitting on the porch holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold. Her name appeared on the screen, and for the first time, I did not feel my heart tighten. Emily, she said. I keep thinking about that paper. So do I. She inhaled, her voice breaking. I should have asked where the money came from. Back then, I just wanted the house so badly. Mom said it was money she and Dad had saved. I believed her because believing her was easier. I did not answer right away. Wind moved through the pine trees. Claire, I said, you were not the one who signed the withdrawal papers. But you lived for years as if that advantage proved you were better than me. The other end went silent for a long time. I know, Claire said. Todd said the same thing. He told me I had been treating you in Mom's voice. For the first time, her apology did not have a but hiding behind it. No excuse. No pulling me into the role of the person who had to comfort her. Just real shame, awkward and late. A week later, my father came to my house alone. He did not call first. He simply stood outside the door with a toolbox in his hand. The porch railing is a little loose, he said. I noticed it the other day. I looked at him. The man who had once stayed silent while I was belittled now stood at my door, like someone who did not know where an apology should begin. You want to fix it? I asked. If you'll let me. I opened the door wider. That afternoon, my father repaired the railing. I made coffee. We did not talk much. But when he tightened the final screw, I understood something. Some apologies do not arrive through words. Sometimes they arrive as someone coming back carrying tools and asking whether they are allowed to step inside. That summer, I was appointed vice president of security operations at the company. Diane introduced me during the all-hands meeting in her calm voice. She said I did not need to make noise to prove my value. Everyone applauded, and I sat in front of the screen with a strange peace inside me. Before, I used to think that if I ever achieved something big, I would call my mother immediately. But that day I did not call. Not because I was angry, but because for the first time I did not need her eyes to confirm that my success was real. That weekend evening, Uncle Frank came over for dinner. We ate on the porch watching the sunset spill down into the valley. When the sky turned pale purple, he set down his glass and said, "Your grandmother Margaret would be so proud of you." I froze. The mention of my grandmother softened something inside me. She was the one who opened that fund for you, he said. She deposited small amounts from her retirement money and told Gloria to keep it for your education. She always said Emily was the most stubborn one in the family, and she meant it as a compliment. I cried. For the first time after everything, I truly cried. Not because of the lost money, and not because of my mother, but because I realized someone had once quietly believed in me. A few months later, my mother sent a letter. Her handwriting was still beautiful, exactly like the signature on the bank statement. She wrote that she had made choices that had never been hers to make, that she did not yet know how to fix them, but that she was trying to understand. It was not a perfect apology. It was only a crack in the wall she had built for too long. I placed the letter in the drawer with the bank statement and the deed to the house. One paper showed what had been taken. One paper showed what I had built back on my own. And one paper showed that people, even late, can still learn how to tell the truth. Claire and I did not become close immediately. We met once a month at a small cafe on Division Street. Sometimes there was more silence than conversation. Sometimes she cried. But we kept showing up. Sometimes two people continuing to show up is already a form of healing. Now when I sit in my living room and look at the pine trees beyond the wide glass, I understand that this house was never just a house. It was proof that I had survived a story someone else had written wrongly about me. My mother once measured a person's worth by the home they owned. Claire once measured it through comparison. My father once measured it by keeping everything quiet. And I once measured it by silence. But silence is not always weakness. Sometimes it is the place where a person quietly rebuilds themselves. I do not hate my mother. Hate is too heavy, and I have already carried enough. I do not hate Claire either. I simply no longer give anyone the right to hold the measuring stick over my life. The door to my home has a lock I chose, on a house I bought in a life I rewrote for myself. And the most precious thing is not that I have the key. The most precious thing is that finally I get to decide who deserves to step inside